Well, hello. Aren't you excited that you get to hear me in surround sound when I'm not even in the room? We are going to talk through, excuse me, quickly, Civil War aims and objectives because we need to finish the war. That's the assignment you're going to be doing on Monday, so it'd help if we had started it. So I'm going to buzz through some of these things just to kind of talk about how the North had some advantages over the South, and the South had some over the North. So to begin with, we have the population, and in the north there are 21.5 million, and in the south there are 9 million. So automatically the north has an advantage because they have more troops that they could pull from, right? If you have that many more bodies, you have that many more that you can supply. So early on, the north just drafted people who were of like the normal military age, but then eventually the south did the same thing, and then eventually had to extend it so the age range is extended from 16 to over 60. So imagine if, your parents and grandparents had to go fight in the Civil War. In terms of railroad mileage, the North was definitely far ahead of the South, and that was useful for a number of different things. They could transport goods, troops, yada, yada, yada. Apparently, I'm getting some action on Facebook. Sorry about the beeping. Manufacturing, the North had 110.1 thousand factories, 1.17 million workers, and cranked out $1.6 billion in products every year. The South had 20,000 factories, 111,000 workers in those factories, not in general, because of course they had slaves, and they had 155 million in products. So again, the North has an advantage here because they have more money that they're able to spend on stuff because they're bringing in more money and selling it, or they're bringing in more money because they're selling their goods. In the North, in terms of finance, they had $207 million in banks that they could go and use. And specie was 56 million, and that's actual physical coins. In the South, they had 47 million in bank deposits and 27 million in specie. Again, the coins, the physical money. So they had more money in the North to work with. Agriculture. I find this to be kind of interesting as we go through some of these. Starting with corn. Obviously, if there's corn in the north, there's corn in the south too. Wheat, 132 million bushels. Oats, 150 million bushels. Cotton, who knew there was cotton in the north, right? Tobacco, 229 million pounds. And 50,000 pounds of rice. What? In the south, we have 280 million bushels of corn, so half that of the north. 31 million bushels of wheat. 10% of, or I don't know, math. I got 13 and 31 mixed up. Anyway, oats, there are 20 million bushels of oats to 150 million. Cotton, 5 million bales. Obviously, they overshadow the north in cotton. Tobacco, 199 million pounds. There's more of that in the north. And rice, 187 million pounds. So way more rice. But, overall, the north is producing more of different things than the south is. Livestock, important in terms of horses that they have to use, and then also in terms of feeding their soldiers. Okay, so 5.7 million milk cows, 6.6 million beef cattle. Yeah, 16.3 million swine. Swine are pigs. I don't know if you know that. And in the south, we have 1.7 million horses, so a quarter of that, well, more than a quarter. I don't even know why I pretend to do math out loud. It's just never works. 800,000 donkeys and mules, 2.7 million milk cows, 7 million beef cattle to 6.6, 5 million sheep. Okay. And since you're not physically there for me to ask you this question, there are several different things that would allow the North to raise a larger, better equipped army. Namely the money and the bodies that they had. Now, if you look at the sheet that I gave you that says Civil War aims and objectives on it, this is starting with the South. And there are three main objectives that they had. First of all, they didn't necessarily want to break away. Well, they wanted to break away, but they didn't want to have to fight for it. So they said, we'll fight if you force us to, but we'd rather just break away and have this be a clean break. And also they wanted to be strictly on the defensive. They didn't want to invade in the north and bother with that. They just wanted to protect their own land. And they also weren't convinced that the North would support a war. Again, we talked a little bit about how it was kind of an engaging public thing when the soldiers came to town, and oh my gosh, there's going to be a battle at Bull Run. Excellent, let's get out the picnic basket and go watch. So they were convinced that the North didn't want to support a long war. For the North, they wanted to reestablish the Union. That was Lincoln's #1 goal, was to preserve the Union. They also didn't believe that secession had wide support. Secession is the idea of breaking away again. And the Southerners didn't think that Northerners would support. No, that was opposite. The Northerners didn't think that Southerners would support secession, which for a lot of reasons was true. They also were convinced in the North, of course, how very American of us, we're economically and personally superior to you in the South. So we're going to win because we're doing the right things. Okay? And as we just kind of buzzed through, there's a number of different advantages that the North has that the South didn't have access to. The manufacturing, the number of factories that they had. Iron ore, woo, represent. Where's the iron ore? Yes, Minnesota. I hope you all just said Minnesota out loud. Yeah, that's where it is. We had a huge northern diverse economy, which is nice. And then canals. What are canals? I asked you, what are canals? Tell me. Just kidding. They're roadways, if you will, quote unquote, for ships. So they use them for transportation. In the South, they had incredible military leadership. All of the military academies, I shouldn't say all of their top people, but a number of the top generals went and fought with the South. I think I told one of the classes this, that Robert E. Lee was originally asked by Lincoln to be in charge of the Army of the Potomac, which is the largest northern army. And Robert E. Lee said, "No, I fight for my country of Virginia," which is a southern state, so that's where he commanded. They also were determined because they wanted to live their lifestyle away from that nasty President Lincoln, and they wanted to go about their business in the South and not, it's kind of like they had the drive to be the one that was going to be successful. And they also had cotton to sell, and who were they selling it to? No, silly goose, not the North. They were selling it to England. England is kind of still pissed at us, so they supported the South. Nuts. But there were some that supported the North too. Okay. Now, the Anaconda Plan. Do you know what an anaconda is? And do you know how it kills its prey? For those of you that don't know, an anaconda is a snake, and it wraps itself around its prey and squeezes it to death. So, the North was going to enact this via its strategy against the South. They were going to do 3 major things. First of all, they were going to have a blockade of the Confederate coastlines so that goods could not go out or in terms of trade. They wanted to keep things from coming to the South, and so they took ships and rolled them all the way around the coast of the southern states. So, probably parallel with Virginia, all the way around and down in Florida, and then around over to Texas. They blockaded the major cities. There weren't a ton of major cities because they had all these plantations, but they blockaded it so they couldn't trade with other countries. Second thing that they wanted to do was gain access to the Mississippi, and then in doing that, they would divide Texas, Arkansas, and Louisiana, because the Mississippi comes down, from Minnesota all the way down through Louisiana, and they could divide off the Confederacy into 2, and so they'd be less powerful. And also, whoever controlled the Mississippi controlled transportation of goods and potentially soldiers up and down the river. And the last thing they wanted to do, I'm yawning because of lack of oxygen, not because this is boring, because this is really exciting stuff. The last thing they wanted to do was capture the Confederate capital. Confederate States of America is what that stands for, or Carla and Staffa. Anyway, the Confederate States of America, the capital at Richmond. So in Richmond, Virginia, that's where they had the capital, and they wanted to take it over to handicap the Confederates. And this map is what I'm going to use to show you. This is there. I was talking about the blockade this way. So the ships would come around and go all the way over to Texas and keep them from coming to major cities so they couldn't trade with other countries. And then also here's the Mississippi. So we divide the Confederacy in two to weaken them. Especially if you cut off and block anybody from getting over this way from like Texas and stuff. The Confederate capital is in Richmond right over here. And so it made it difficult for them. The Southerners really just wanted to kind of bubble up into the north, foray into the north, and then run back to the south. They just wanted to cause problems and heckle people. They didn't actually want to go and take over any land because, again, they're looking to fight based on the defensive, right? They aren't looking to engage and fight against other countries. And the second thing that they wanted to do was gain British assistance, and they were going to use the cotton to do this. It's kind of a significant point for support for them. So if you have any questions, turn to someone that's next to you, or maybe your dog, and ask them. But we're going to switch gears a little bit because I want to talk to you about specific battles.